I'm a mass timber specialist and also kind of an internal business development manager for Lendlease. So what I do is I support a number of different business units, our design build business unit, construction business units, our development business units all across the US. And because of Lendlease's strong interest in timber, our timber experts across the globe kind of all interface as well. So I tend to work on kind of more global timber issues with the Global Timber Group.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've been in that space where interfacing with big tech a little bit. So why are timber solutions trending in big tech companies at the moment?
It's a good question. You know, in general, big tech has a large interest in retaining talent, and also kind of putting using their money to kind of advance construction in ways that it's not currently able to advance it on its own. So I think in large part the commercial motivation has a lot to do with being very innovative in their approaches, and also kind of creating an environment for workplaces that are very different. Lendlease has got a partnership to do design build work with Google in particular, in the commercial space, but our development group also has a partnership with Google to do residential. And I think a lot of their motivation is really based around sustainability and kind of pushing and advancing that cause forward with the amount of purchasing power and the pipeline that they can basically offer in that space. There's some real potential to kind of get to the scale that timber needs to be at in order to make it really an economical, feasible solution. So I think, the innovative part isn't innovative for innovation's sake, I would say. I really believe that it's, most people in construction recognize that it's one of the industries that has not advanced, has not utilized technology to improve. And so, pushing this agenda in this space gives the construction industry as a whole kind of the ability to take a big jump.
Absolutely. And having this sort of pipeline of work that's coming ahead, does this allow yourselves at Lendlease to look at new strategies or new areas of innovation and bring digital in as these customers might be requesting?
Yeah, so innovation and digital design are part and parcel with what we do in the timber space. So there are a couple aspects of Lendlease has a digital design division that is working on a number of initiatives. One of which is the ability to have kind of a generative design at really early phases of a project, which if that database is really strong to kind of feed that automated generative design, what it gives you is a real ability to strongly predict costs and pro formas and things that you need at early development stages. So leveraging the amount of data that we can collect on the fact that we are a large company, and utilizing that data to make good informed decisions at an early stage is really helpful. And other initiatives within our digital design platform include stuff like digital twins, right? Doing BIM modeling to some degree, but at another level of detail that would allow us to take a design directly into kind of fabrication, which is obviously of benefit when we're talking about timber structures, because we know that there's, being able to take design directly into prefabrication makes that transition between design and procurement really smooth.
Yeah, 100%. And I imagine from, suppliers and manufacturers' point of view, having that all somewhat automated, it's going to provide efficiencies on that end, and inevitably maybe the cost curves can keep coming down. Have you seen potential in the cost curves of timber becoming more cost effective compared to concrete with this sort of innovation on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say even at the early stages of being able to implement some of these technologies, timber is competitive with concrete for sure. Um, you know, it's always market dependent, and it's got to be the right. It's got to be a good, efficient structural typology to kind of beat concrete in particular. Um, but I would say the ability, so the way some of these technologies kind of help with the the cost situation is really that the more accurate we can be at an earlier stage, the more accurate that cost comparison can be. And we have a lot of data on what it costs to build a concrete building, right? We've built them for years, and we've got lots of projects under our belt. So there's a very there's a lot of confidence with which we can estimate the cost of a concrete building in an early stage. With timber, it becomes very different because there's lots of different structural typologies out there, and we don't have a lot of built experience. So the confidence with which we are costing those building systems may have some more built-in contingency than maybe it needs and it requires. So the fact that we can utilize some of this digital technology to take out some of that unknown, it also requires data on the other end. So we do have to get more projects under our belt to kind of feed that. But I think that's one way we're going to see cost efficiencies come down. I think one of the other elements that Lendlease Digital Design is also, one of the other initiatives that Lendlease Digital Design is working on is in kind of systematizing and in more the product development. When I say product, I mean like the building product development. So coupling systems together that can work well is like another way we can, the more systemized we can make our timber building approaches, we're also going to be able to have more cost certainty and be able to drive costs down in other ways, procurement and other things. So.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. You did touch on a bit about generative design, so this term might be a little bit unfamiliar to people listening right now. And so, what sort of what's the end goal of generative design? So, what sort of things does it look like, in a practical point of view?
So, generative design is really the ability to have a massing that is an informed massing, right? If you know how many units you need in that massing, is there actually a real floor plan layout that can be attached to that, real structural layout, real foundation layout, and then having the back end of that generative design. So it's going to say, hey, we've got some parameters set here, and it's going to build almost like a real design that has the products and the pieces attached to it that can now give you a real-time cost. Now that may not be really the design that you choose to use, but maybe at some point we can get to the point where it knows actually the kinds of decisions we want to make, and actually is getting smarter about that design, and maybe it is a real design that we may use in the future.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And included in that is that structural sizing, and potentially, I think I saw on the website, having detailed design up front. So you've actually could have the detailed design embedded within the generative design. So it's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily only have to be preliminary sort of thing. You can actually pull it through to detail. Is that about right?
Right. So that generative design tool, I guess I was talking more from the tool for kind of a developer, but specifically for construction, the level of detail in this generative design is this, LOD 400, right? So you actually are generating real-time information that can be used on a detailed level as well. Um, so yes.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And so Lendlease, you mentioned you got a lot of data on concrete buildings. You got some data on mass timber and timber buildings. Probably got the most data, I'd say, albeit not much compared to concrete, data on timber buildings, because Lendlease really pioneered the field with 10 to 12 years ago, or whenever Forte went up. I forget exactly the dates, but
2012. Yeah.
2012. There you go. And since then, you've been on a mass timber journey. So can you describe what this journey's been like and where it leads you where you're at today?
Yeah. So I wasn't here in 2012, so I can't take credit for any of the amazing things Lendlease did at that point in time. But um, I think at the beginning of the timber exploration, there was, really it was like vetting an opportunity for a specific pipeline, and there were some real advantages to using timber and its lightweight nature on the sites um, in Melbourne where the first project went up. Um, Really, that project was a proof of concept to see if there was value, probably in slightly from an aesthetic perspective, although that the intent was not to was not the aesthetic demand for that project. But the structural efficiency and kind of some of the on-site advantages, I think what that project ended up proving out was that the speed and the safety and the sustainability aspects of the project really resonated really well with the culture at Lendlease. And so I think at that point, having proved that maybe there was even more there than was originally planned for, it kind of gave birth to the idea of doing it on a more consistent basis for some of the pipelines in Australia, which is kind of where the design make business came in. And Lendlease really kind of was able to grow their knowledge on fabrication and supply and um, and while the design make business is not something that is currently still in operations, it's um, it's that wasn't necessarily because it it couldn't support itself. It was had a lot more to do with just the internal business decisions for Lendlease. But really, that kind of knowledge, I think, has what enabled Lendlease to kind of think about timber in a much larger context and really be able to tackle the idea of using timber for some of our major global pipelines, like our pipeline in Milan with the Mine project, um, and our Google residential work as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And can you describe like the scale of these projects to some extent? So, what are the most exciting projects at the moment that you're working on, and you working more that global role? I guess you've got a understanding across the world, and I'd imagine some things can and can't be disclosed at this stage, but you can speak in general terms, maybe.
Yeah, I know that our residential contract with Google is in the neighborhood of 15 billion. How many units that is, I want to say um, it's somewhere around 5 million square feet of residential, retail, hospitality. So we're talking really large scale. I'm not familiar with what those same numbers are for our mined um, pipeline, but they're probably of a similar scale. So
Yeah, I like it. And at these sort of scales, talking timber, supply is a big part of the question. Do you see the supply chain evolving to be able to service larger and larger projects as the years go by?
you know, in terms of supply chain, I guess I haven't I haven't seen anything that gives me pause to think that that the pipeline or that the supply chain isn't prepared to respond to this, to respond to the increase in demand. Um, because it seems like there's continually more and more capacity. So they're not waiting, like our CLT and timber suppliers aren't waiting until they've reached capacity. They kind of see the growth coming, especially here in the US with the code changes. I think that was a really good, helpful kind of trigger for the manufacturers to kind of amp up their capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're approaching to the end, Lisa, we've had a bit of a forward-thinking discussion already, but what do you see as the future of timber construction as we go forward? Moving into the future.
You know, I'm really excited by the increase in the number and quality and scale of projects here in the US in particular with the new code changes. I think that we're going to start to explore a lot more, like a bit more repetition in the type of typologies that we're seeing. I think we're going to advance a lot more in the realm of prefabricated systems that kind of can be coupled with cross-laminated timber and mass timber in general, and really to kind of achieve more of a modular approach to construction. So, that coupled with the digital technologies, I think is some really exciting space for timber.
Yeah, you touched on a good point there. So what does like timber enable? It's obviously prefabricated element, but does it actually enable other parts to, unlock other opportunities in that prefabrication space?
Yeah, that's one of the things, Lendlease is really, really adamant about, is the fact that it's not, well, what we do is not just timber, right? Timber is this catalyst for so many things. It's the catalyst for, you know, for prefabricated structure, but it's also because the technology can be so precise, and the fact that we've got a completed deck that now is structurally complete and ready for follow-on trades. How do we use those advantages to really see major schedule gains on site? People like to talk about how fast timber buildings go up, and they do, but there's only a certain period of time where it's actually on the critical path. So really leveraging the full advantage that timber offers is really about exploring these secondary system technologies that can be coupled with CLT. Pods and prefabricated facades are ones that, we at Lendlease have utilized on a number of projects and, find a lot of value in. But there's stuff in the MEP services space as well. And so I think that's
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to speak with you. You're out all the way out in California, is that right?
yep,
Yeah.
California.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Is there anywhere people want to find out more about what we've been speaking about today, or yourself, or is there anywhere people should go?
Well, I'd really like to point people to the fact that Lendlease actually just revised our sustainability targets. And we are a 1.5 degree Celsius aligned company. And we've got some pretty aggressive carbon targets for 2025 and 2040. So I would definitely, say that there's some information on that in our website, but just to point out that I think more and more this is something that major companies are wanting to tackle, and timber is part of that solution. So thanks for having me.